today's topic. We do have complimenting plaids on. Hello, and welcome everybody. You are here in top form. I guess I better move it over. It's very confusing, this shot. Our producer will be horrified by how we framed that.
Yeah.
Although you did get it, Leslie, so it wasn't
tried.
up the nose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll have to get
Which
the
was
stand for
unbecoming.
next time.
Well, that was unbecoming. So today, more success, less friction, aligning with the laws of nature for a smooth glide to achieving anything. And I should start out by saying that we are missing Alex. We're missing our co-host. I'm missing my glasses, my water, and our co-host. So even though we were here and prepping way in advance,
well, that could be a symptom of Parkinson's law because we had too much time.
Yes, and we didn't get right on it. We didn't get after it right away because we thought we had all the time in the world. It could be. And so this is what we're going to talk about. There are certain laws of nature which are different than the laws of man, and we're going to begin with a discussion of that. And we're going to talk about how you discover what these are. We're going to share a few with you. We're also going to share a resource here, which is Richard Koch's book, The 80-20 Principle and 92 Other Powerful Laws of Nature. We're just picking a few. We're not going to
just so people know, Richard Koch is not one of the Koch brothers.
No, that's right, because we don't want to start off with a trigger. No, I like to wait.
Or did we?
I like to get into the triggering like after. I like to be 5 minutes in.
Okay. I'll set a timer.
Then we can set an alarm. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what a law of nature is, the difference between a law of nature and law of man, and then we're specifically going to take a look at a few that are fairly easy to set up a few action items on. And laws of nature are kind of like force multipliers. You only have to follow one or two to get a massive benefit. And if you follow two or three and you do them really well, it's not going to be 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. It's going to be 1 + 1 = 5 or 1 + 1 + 1 = 125. Right. It's a huge force multiplier. So let's talk a little bit about that. Laws of nature are fairly unchanging and have been, at least in the sense of physics, since the Big Bang. And on Earth, the biological laws of nature we're going to talk about have been pretty consistent since we went from single-cell organisms to more complex organisms. Unlike physics, we're not quite as far along on the spectrum in understanding biological laws as we are in understanding very large physical laws.
Right, like especially Newtonian physics.
Newtonian physics, we have a pretty good handle on how that works. We're starting to get a handle on quantum physics and how it works at a very micro level. But we're kind of in the same place with biology. It's super complicated to us.
Right.
But we have been able to identify several laws at work, and to the extent that we can align with them, they're going to help us in business and in life. So what do we mean when we say the laws of man are kind of ever-changing and the laws of nature are pretty stable? So, for example, laws of man could be something like the death penalty.
Right.
Some societies abhor the death penalty. There are many countries in the world that wouldn't extradite a person to the United States if they could possibly face the death penalty.
Correct.
And then there are other countries like the United States where it's practiced maybe more than a lot of people would like, but it's practiced in a very small and narrow way. And then there are other countries where it is the punishment for virtually everything.
Right.
So people could disagree about their laws. People also tend to promulgate laws to try to control one another. They usually articulate it this way: I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to make our society or where we live safer or better for you or your business or whatever. Leslie, what was that? I'm hearing.
Oh, yeah. We're on. We had 3 watchers. I'm currently one of them. Katie's wondering if she's in the right place now.
You are, Katie. Welcome.
Yep. And
Carla
says hello.
Yeah, Carla, welcome.
So the 3 of us are watching.
Carla.
I'm hosting from my personal today, answering questions.
Yes, because our software was hijacked.
Yep.
But I want to say that Carla has been complimenting my cooking, which always makes me think that when someone compliments my cooking, that they're very intelligent and evolved. You know, when people like what we like, we tend to think that they're very savvy. We are going to do a show. You may see this in your little log that you just sent me on cognitive bias, which is kind of related to today's show.
Yeah.
If you haven't caught it, by the way, the OODA Loop show we did, was that last week? Or the week before, 2 weeks ago. That kind of relates to this and is a great one. So go watch OODA Loop if you haven't seen it. So Katie is talking to us.
She said you're a great cook.
I am. That's true, Sam.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've had good food before.
I've smelled your blasphemy before.
And it smells good.
It smells delicious.
So we were talking about the laws of man.
Another example of a law of man. You
Yes.
can eat this, but you can't eat that. Right.
Well, some people would say those are laws of God. And actually, when I first published this, I was getting a little bit of pushback from people that thought that I was equating the laws of nature with the laws of God. So we're different religions, both practitioners of our religions. But they get us to largely the same place. I'm allowed to eat a lot more stuff than you are.
That's true.
A lot more creatures, cloven, hooved creatures and things like that. But can you eat lobster?
I can.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
In Christianity, I can eat lobster. In Judaism, no lobster or bacon.
No.
But Josh once said when Robin was encouraging him to take, to go to Hebrew school, we had a private tutor come.
Right.
He said that bacon was that was the breaking point. He would go to Hebrew school when he was eating bacon. So it's just, there was not going to be a trade-off on that. So he has he doesn't follow any of the kosher laws, but there, law of man, ever changing.
Yes.
I mean, how many assimilated Jews by the 1960s or 70s were having a lot of bacon in America? A high percentage.
Yeah.
Feel free to leap in if you think I'm wrong about that. So those laws are changing constantly.
Right.
Whereas these laws of nature we're going to talk about have been established by very lengthy observation through the scientific method over, kind of as long as man has been in existence, but really recently, since the mid-1800s, we've developed tools to help us to measure all of these things that we're going to be talking about.
Right.
So give me an example of a law of physics that might have application in business.
So, we headline the show with friction.
Yep.
Right? So there's something we call the coefficient of friction. And that basically means like how much friction there is, right? And the law of nature is that the coefficient of static friction is greater than the coefficient of kinetic friction. So that means the same surface, same condition of the surface, it's harder to get something moving than it is to keep it moving. So we might call that momentum, right?
So momentum is a great law of physics to keep in mind. And here's how it's applied. And we have a couple of friends, hopefully, that are watching who have run into problems with this.
Right.
Because, and you'll hear potential contradictions. One of the things that we're going to talk about is in biology, nature always overproduces because the environment is changing.
Right.
And so nature, we're going to talk about this in detail, wants to produce lots of babies so that multiple babies will survive in the new changed environment and thrive. So that sounds like we should always be producing new things. But this goes to this issue of friction. If we're constantly producing new things and never getting behind the ones that really work, then that takes lots of energy because it's harder to get the new things rolling.
Right.
So, okay, that's a perfectly good one. Now, for those people who don't understand what we mean when we say the scientific method, how do you describe the scientific method that's been used to kind of identify these laws?
So the scientific method is a systematic way of asking questions to determine if your belief is correct. And so you'll start off with, this is my hypothesis. This is how I'm going to test that hypothesis. And then you'll either have affirmative or negative result, right? So one of my pet peeves is people say, well, that was a failed experiment. Well, the experiment didn't fail. It just didn't give you the result you expected, right? It was actually a good experiment.
In fact, the scientific method is all about failure.
Correct.
Because you're going to fail. And so marketing is the same. Marketing is very analogous to the scientific method. You're going to fail way more often than you succeed. And the 80-20 rule, which we're going to talk about, another law of nature is because we see it in everything. Leslie, I saw you just put up, what is that, a picture of...
I put up the link of the Laws of Nature link, the NPR.
And there's certain patterns that recur in very complicated ways. And the 80-20 rule and some rules of fractals inform us about all of those things. So we're going to spend some time talking about that. So, why don't we do it? Why don't we leap in with the 80-20 rule?
Okay.
Because this seems to be a kind of this quasi-mathematical law that's embedded in everything. And it's also known as the Pareto principle. Pareto was initially making an observation in economics. He was studying the culture and society in which he lived, and he noticed that about 80% of the wealth was concentrated in about 20% of the population. But he started to, and then other people have started to pick up on the fact that this is built into lots of things. So if we studied humans in the house where they live, we'd probably see that they spend about 80% of the time in 20% of the rooms. They wear 20% of their wardrobe about 80% of the time. There's a strong favoritism toward these things. And this just seems to be built into lots of different systems.
Right.
So how does that help us some with business? If we know that this is kind of a law of nature and it reoccurs in all different sorts of ways, for example, in livestock, 80% of the best livestock, as it's defined, come from 20% of the stock in a herd. In business, 80% of the problems come from that bottom 20% of people who tend to be the ones that refuse to pay too. So let's talk about how you take this idea or this law of nature and you apply it to business to get help.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways to do it. The one we talk about a lot is in our marketing. Is 80% of our leads or new customers, depending on how far down the chain you want to go, usually comes from 20%, maybe even less, of the marketing you do. So it's a matter of having a good experiment, a good way of testing, or a system in place to identify where your prospects are coming from, right? And then saying, well, instead of going wide on 100% of marketing options, I can start going deep on that 20% that is what's actually working for me.
And every time you do one of these 80-20 slices, you could do it again.
Right.
In that regard, let's talk about this. Here's a book that we have. We're going to give one of these away. So if you're a viewer and you share this, Leslie, I don't know, can they share it while it's still on?
Yeah, I just shared it as a quote-unquote viewer this time.
So anybody that shares, Leslie's going to keep, if you share this, Leslie's going to keep track of who you are. Oh, Steve Richardson, welcome. Reza, welcome. This is a book by Perry Marshall with the foreword by Richard Koch, who we're going to talk a fair amount about today. And this is all about 80-20 as it applies to marketing.
Right.
This book by Koch is all about 80-20 as it applies to business and life more generally.
Right.
So we've got 2 of these to give away. So get entered, and we're going to just arbitrarily pick new names, and we'll ship these out. If you share, you might also want to message Leslie your address so we can send that to you.
Yes, please.
A hard book. Yep, Leslie says yes. So also, in terms of 80-20, having key performance indicators and really understanding in business your accounting and your numbers, very important. So we want to mention one of our sponsors early on.
That's right.
And that is Kahuna Accounting, kahunaaccounting.com.
Yep, that's their website.
So if you're a small business owner or you own a professional practice and you're looking to outsource bookkeeping and accounting, you could talk to the folks at Kahuna Accounting. And they are helping to bring you the show and keeping it free and making sure that we've got lots of good content for you. And that we have an Uber producer here. So also, if you're interested in really immersing yourself in force multipliers and understanding how you align with the forces of nature and doing some of my whiteboarding process, then join us in Arizona in October. Yeah, and the way that you get the early bird pricing is still up for just a little bit longer. If you have been before, just go hop on 3daystosuccess.com. And you can register right there and save your spot. If you've never been before, you could call Lisa at 610. Thank you for the liking and loving. 933-8069. And Lisa will get you set up with an appointment to talk to me and or Sam, and we'll make sure that we think it's a good match for you. We don't want you to come if it's not going to be. So we'll help you walk through that. So I have a couple of points here on 80-20. Oh, but I was starting to talk about this. If you 80-20 who your best prospects are,
Right.
and then you build marketing that's going to appeal to them. You're making a hypothesis or a guess as to
Right.
who's going to buy. Assuming you're right, of the people that buy, there'll be a certain percent who are uber customers. They're going to make
Right.
referrals. They buy, they consume the product and tell other people about it. They use it. So when you go back and you OODA loop this, that's why I
Right.
said it's a good idea to go back and look at the OODA loop show from 2 weeks ago. When you go back and look at this again, you're going to see that of that group of people that bought your product or your service
Right.
from you, there's going to be a 20% of them who send all the referrals or behave in an even better way. Taking a look at that subset, especially as you start to get data and find out who they are, and
Right.
are they men or are they women? What's their age? Where do they live? How do they think? What are the other things they like? Gives you insights into how you can begin to refine your marketing to appeal to them.
Right.
And then once you've done that superior group, you're going to be able to 80-20 that again.
Right.
So you're going to be able to grow that group, and then you're going to be able to go in and say, who's the 20% of this group
Right.
that's going to spend more?
And the cool thing about that is that 20% are the people that want to buy more from you.
Yeah, that's how I tell.
Potentially a lot more.
That's how I tell people,
Yeah.
in part, to identify it is how have they behaved?
Right.
Did they spend? Did they take your first upsell?
Mm-hmm.
Did they also go and buy the downsell? Have they started interacting? Are they showing you that they're consuming it? The flip side of this, the ones that you want to make sure, so I always try to build a who am I selling to and who am I not selling to?
Right.
So one of the things you can also look at from an 80-20 perspective is who refunds,
Mm-hmm.
who complains. It may be, by the way, you might have to take that seriously. Maybe the product isn't up to snuff. Maybe you're
Right.
selling it to the wrong people. Maybe there is some good feedback in there on how to fix something. But there's also a good chance that those people are just not a good match for this product, and the
Right.
product might be excellent. And if you begin to see trends there, that you're getting people who are not a good match, then you can begin to construct a list of factors of who you're not looking
Right.
for. You can even put that into copy and videos and content, say who this is for and who this is not for. So I was just helping Alex with a copywriting project that he was working on. And he had a who is this for?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the first things I went in and said, who's it not for?
Right.
And now we were making a guess about both of those. We don't know. This is a brand new product for a company
Right.
that's just trying to sell it. So we'll have to see. And so there, if that landing page doesn't sell, that could be considered like a failure.
Right.
But it isn't. It's told us, if we go back and we look at who we were sending the ad to and who we were taking to that page, we either guessed wrong about how they talked about it or whether they would want this thing
Right.
or not. So a couple more things I have here, and Leslie, Sam, just jump in. I wanted, with each law, to put together a
Mhm.
few practical action items rather than just the theory. But aligning your business with 80-20 in your marketing, in how you hire and fire, it will be true that certain employees on the team are going to perform the vast majority of the work where others don't, and certain people on the team will create all the problems that others don't.
Right.
So just bear this in mind. What about training? You're going to find that there's certain types of training and ways of training and tools of training that are going to do all the heavy lifting for you. So applying 80-20 to all the different aspects of your business and waking up each morning and saying, how can I do this again,
Yeah.
is very powerful. So I would say one of the first things to do is to make it your mantra, how do I achieve more with less?
Mm-hmm.
And this is kind of going to the friction too,
Right.
which is if you keep generating products all the time, which is necessary for reasons we'll get into later, you want to also kill off the ones that aren't working. We'll call those
Yeah.
the babies later.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, along those lines, that that idea of friction is once you identify who your better clients are,
It becomes less friction.
it's less friction, and in our business for sure, and I imagine in almost every business, it's much harder to acquire a new client
Sure.
than it is to keep one, right? So that's kind of that example of kinetic versus static friction. It's a lot of work for me to get a new one, and it's not as much work to keep that client. As long as I've figured out who are the right ones, who are the buyers, who are the ones with a good stick rate, they're easy to teach, they're highly participatory. They go to tournaments, they go to events, they're engaged in the community. And these are all part of that 80-20 system.
And you're, in effect, keeping them, in your case, in a continuity type of
Correct.
program.
Yeah.
And so the longer they stay, the better for them, because they're more likely to get more sophisticated, elegant results, and the better for you, because you're not having to go out and spend a whole lot of time, money, and energy. And if we 80-20 this thing so that we identify those super training customers who also refer.
Right.
And let's talk about that just for a second. Leslie, have you ever had anybody refer to you? So they've worked with you before, but they've sent you a terrible client?
Yes, I actually have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the thing is that we tend, as the recipient of that referral, to think that was bad, that was a mistake by the person that referred. It wasn't. We just didn't teach them. That told us we didn't teach them enough about who we really are and what we really do, and they only surmised and sent us the wrong person. So don't be shy about finding out who the people are that make these referrals, and then also teaching them the right kind
How
of
to do
referral
it.
yeah. And giving them the tools to do it. So one of the things that actually Koch suggests here is start with the 55 principle and then move to the 80-20 principle, because the 80-20 principle can seem kind of daunting.
Right.
So look for the 5%, because it's more obvious.
Yes.
Look for the 5% that produce this gigantic result. And this is kind of 80-20ing the 80-20 principle.
Right.
So just start with trying to find the very, very best customers that you have, or the very, very best products, or the very, very best ads for those products, or combine all of those things.
Yeah.
And test the ads. And we've got lots of shows on how you do that.
Yeah.
And we can put a few of those in the show notes too.
Yeah.
Be sparing with what you own and capital expenditure. And here's why. The 80-20 rule, along with sort of the rules of evolution, biological evolution that we'll visit later, mean that there's lots of changes. And so if we expend an enormous amount in the physical plant or the printing press, if you will, we may not be as agile. We may not be as quick to abandon that. We want to make it work even in a new environment. So especially while we're testing, renting or borrowing or using those things, or getting into a cooperative deal.
And it kind of relates to what we were talking about before the show with the idea of staffing and personnel. It's very difficult for a company to run with departments in all sorts of areas for things that you might not necessarily be billing for all the time. So that idea of either outsourcing or freelancing and bringing people in as you need them, rather than owning that staff.
Because 80-20 is going to mean you're constantly looking at who are we bringing in of them? What are they really buying? How are they using it? And the more you can be agile about that and reapply the 80-20 rule and do the OODA loop, the better you're going to be. But a big expenditure and locking yourself into large staff and large capital and to locking up resources that only do one sort of thing. This is why in my organization, I'm always trying to hire people that love to learn and are adaptable by nature and sort of optimistic.
So you could say that is an 80-20 of the characteristics of the type of person that you're hiring. It's like this 20% of qualities is more important.
Yes, than these others.
Yeah.
And I do that at both ends of the spectrum. Here's what I've found are qualities that I really look for in somebody that does this kind of job. And here are things we do not want to see there.
Yeah.
Now, they're not the same for all jobs. I would say there's certain ones, like I do hire for optimism, because generally optimistic people, that's not to say that I don't want a pessimist or somebody that's going to challenge my assumptions. But in general, I will hire for optimism because those folks are more resilient.
Right.
And we are in a high-pressure, changing legal environment all the time,
Yeah.
fraught with emotion because somebody's dead with what I do. So, and then in the 80-20 rule, there's this idea of subtracting as well as adding. So I want to leave that one for a second because we're going to get back to it when we get into the laws of evolutionary biology and this idea of killing the babies. So I remember the very first time I used that expression.
On the ball.
Yeah, which was a long time ago. It was like 8 years ago. And it was a bunch of very sensitive people. I'm not saying, viewers, that you're not loving and sensitive. I'm sure they are. But it looks like Leslie's saying maybe you are.
Yeah.
But
They can't see me
Tucker.
today.
But here's what we're talking about there, is that it is the nature of nature to always over-reproduce.
Right.
So what's that all about? So the example that Koch uses in the book is if shad laid all their shad eggs and they were fertilized and they all matured into shad and survived, the ocean would be literally full of shad. There would be no water. There'd just be shad in a generation or two. It wouldn't take long. So why do maple trees, I have maple trees here, and those little spinning things that come down produce thousands of mini maple trees in my yard every year, the vast majority of which are run over by the mower and killed instantaneously.
Right.
So why do shad and every animal that we know, every plant, every species, even small microorganisms, all over-reproduce? So what's that about? It's part of this process of biological evolution, which is we don't know when we're reproducing what the world's going to look like because it's constantly changing. And I don't want to get into the debate about climate change deniers or anything here. Well, I do, but I think it might distract.
What were we timing on when we were going to get to that?
We got
very good.
far.
Pretty good.
Yeah. But the thing is this, is that there are constantly all kinds of changes going on in any micro or macro environment. So I don't want people spiraling off thinking I'm talking about Arctic or Antarctic ice melts. I'm not. I'm just saying all kinds of stuff changes. And when we over-reproduce, we are creating babies with little genetic and biological differences.
Right.
So chances are that one of those babies is going to be optimally suited to whatever change has gone on and is going to thrive, when others are going to have minor genetic mutations or differences which will not allow them to thrive and they're going to perish.
Right.
And so what happens in the business version of this is that most companies are not innovative. And so they're going to die just because change is taking place. And the pace of change in business has accelerated in the last few decades to a pace that we have never seen anything like it before. So, I mean,
Well, you look at what Amazon has done with, online commerce, and it's interesting that they're circling back and creating brick and mortar bookstores.
Yes.
So, I mean, just think about that. But think about a catalog company like Sears that had the list.
They had the giant list.
They had the list, but they weren't able to innovate.
And they knew what people wanted.
But weren't able to innovate and shift from the catalog model to an online model. And they're basically out of business.
And
well, now they're taking their properties and renting them and becoming like real estate and developers now.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating.
Finally a save.
Yeah.
So how does this apply? How do we use this in business? Well, first, you have the Sears, where generally speaking, if they're not able to innovate, they're going to perish.
Right.
And then you have some businesses that are innovative, but they're not producing enough babies. Now this, I understand that if this were easy, everybody would be a millionaire or billionaire. So we're saying two things that seem to be contradictory. Friction of creating lots of new products and the absolute need in order to thrive and survive to create lots of new products.
Right.
The difference is this. Most businesses don't create any. Most businesses create too few. Of the very few businesses that are super innovative, the next mistake they make is that they don't kill the babies.
Right.
They let all of these things that they've created out there, and that creates drag. So what we're saying is that there is this equilibrium you have to find where you're being sufficiently creative so that change in the environment doesn't overtake and kill you.
Right.
And yet you have the willingness to dispose of the failed experiments. There's a very interesting little variation on this having to do with trees that I want to talk about because it's a super sophisticated overlay. Science is now finding out that trees in forests, because there's whatever's causing it. I don't want to provoke people that don't think there's climate change either, because in some areas where forests were thriving in cooler wetter circumstances. They have hotter, drier
Yep.
conditions now. So what scientists are just beginning to observe is that there's this massive sophisticated organism. It's a connection of fungi that attach themselves to the roots of trees, and they're in this symbiotic relationship with trees. So trees, of course, are overproducing, reproducing, but some trees just are not suited to survive in the new environment. So one of the things they do is right before they die, they drop their nutrients into this system, which weirdly redirects them to the new type of trees that seem to be thriving the most in these new conditions. So there is an uber organism that is reallocating between the species and which ones are going to thrive.
Yeah.
So we are back, and we were talking about evolution and the laws of natural selection and how they apply to your business, and we're trying to give everybody a few really actionable points here. So we'll just give this a minute or two for the audience, hopefully to come back if they see us. One of the things we were saying is expose your creations to full bore competition.
Right.
So don't coddle them. Let them go out there, and some of them are going to really thrive.
And we've used this, you and I have trained in many different martial arts for many, many years, and we've used that example where for a long time, many schools were very siloed, and they didn't expose their techniques to competition, and then were brutally awakened when they didn't work.
Yeah, and when mixed martial arts became popular, everybody was confronted with what worked and what really didn't. And so the spinning back hook kick of Taekwondo turned out not to fare well.
Not great.
Against the grapplers and the jiu-jitsu folks. Can you see us again?
I can see you and I can hear you, and I just apologized
It's very exciting.
to everybody.
It's very exciting that you're there to tell us these. We could have just kept talking.
We probably would have.
We do have some very good things here, though. So scatter variant products around your core products. So find out, and we're going to do a show on how you find out from your people and how you get them to talk to you and engage with you and tell you what they want and what they think. And then that show is get people to talk to you and then ignore them, because there are dangers in that too. But this is one of those places where you might want to do a little bit of it. When you have people that have bought core products and services, finding out what else they want. So, like, for example, you have yoga. Do you have massage?
No.
But there was a time when there was there.
Yeah.
So that was like a failed one.
Correct.
So that doesn't mean, by the way, that might not ever work again as the nature of the audience changes. So there's all sorts of things. Depending on what you do, there may be other things that people say they want or that you think they want and you're not sure, so you just try it and you make more offers. And we have talked about that. This is making more offers and seeing which ones stick. Kill the babies.
Yep.
You have to be able to do it systematically. You have to have that scheduled. It's just part of your regular OODA loop, whether that's annually, twice a year, which is not biannually, which means every 2 years. That's a little long.
Semi-annually.
Semi-annually, thank you. Quarterly, monthly, weekly, depends on how fast your marketplace is changing. But you've got to go back in and look at it. Now, this doesn't mean, and again, here's this thing where people are like, oh, it's going to be hard because you say two different things. I'm not talking to any particular one of our listeners, but it's like, look, will that person recognize my impression of them? No, obviously you've got to give things time to work. But you will be shocked that there will be many things that will just start working automatically. And you'll also be shocked if you start paying attention to these patterns that the things you coddle just never made it. And you spend a lot of time and trouble and money on them over and over and over again, the ones that really make the money.
And recognize like this iterative process is something that's working right now because the marketplace is changing, might not be working a year from now.
And if the market in your particular situation is just slower to change for some reason or another, or you have a winner, we're not saying kill the winner, we're saying make the winner work harder and then build other things around it that maybe make sense, and in some cases don't. Some of this is counterintuitive. Sometimes we've made offers to people where we just have a weird gut reaction based on who's buying that they might like this thing, and weirdly they then do. accept the market's verdict. That's what we're talking about.
Right.
Set an outside limit where if you don't see X and Y and Z, whether it's fair or not is not what matters. Did people buy it? Did they buy your product or your service?
Mm-hmm.
And then only expect a few winners. This goes to the scientific method. Scientists, and this is probably why I was faced with a choice when I was in college because I was coding. There's something, by the way. When we were first learning to code, didn't we think coders would be necessary forever?
Yep.
And coding as a job is what, 30, 40 years old, really?
Yeah.
It's going to go away.
Yep.
There's machines and code that will code now. So we're going to have a show on AI, by the way, when it's time to
very exciting.
Yeah, when it's time to
Very
freak out.
excited about
I've
that.
got a former National Geographic's producer who fears the singularity who's going to come on as our guest.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool.
But I think she fears it appropriately.
It's a rational fear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's Skynet
Mhm.
level stuff. Yeah. Could happen.
Skynet smiles.
And so this is like, the thing is, I was coding, I was working as a geologist, and I was doing, political science and history and all these weird things. And I ultimately had to decide, am I going to go to grad school in geology or in computer science, or am I going to go to law school?
Yeah.
And probably was a mistake, by the way, for reasons we could discuss, but I went to law school because science, to me, ultimately I decided is living with constant failure.
Mm-hmm.
Constant failure. It is the thing that's really going to get you the result you ultimately need. So what I found out was marketing is living with constant failure.
Yeah.
And I consult for marketing companies, and so it cracks me up when a marketing company, of all people, says, so when we roll this out, this is just going to work like gangbusters. And I was like, yeah, well, maybe. I mean, we're making a wild game. You have a brand new product. You don't really know who's going to buy it. You only have an idea, and you didn't do any market research. So we're going to take a stab at it. Here's another one. Mendel's genes and business and how it relates.
Mm-hmm.
So one, I have used the best genes available, invent or reproduce them. So this is a concept right out of Koch.
Yeah.
There are business models which are built on great genes. Those are genes like things like this. Let's hire really good people. Let's identify in advance the sorts of skills they should have. Let's find ways of training them and building a culture. It's not a particular kind of culture. It's building a culture that people are drawn to, and you're hiring the right people that fit into that culture rather than people that don't.
Right.
So you can find the genetic blueprint of something that's working for someone else and with which you really feel aligned, and start using that. Yes, you can also invent aspects of that or plug them in. What I think is better for people who are new to business is to adopt somebody else's genes and then begin to innovate once you've got cash flow. Make yourself a great vehicle for the best business genes. This is adaptation. So that as you see something happening in the marketplace, maybe in another business or sector, you're constantly asking yourself, how could we adapt that piece of genetic code into our business?
Right.
Is it compatible or is it not compatible? And there's more compatibility with wildly different things than you think. Some of the tomatoes that I think we buy in the store now have, I'm not saying this is a good thing, but I think they have like frog genes in them to make them easy to pack up and store. That's why I grow heirloom tomatoes. And Leslie, you do. We grow our heirloom tomatoes.
I mean, a really common one is corn, glow-in-the-dark corn. So they take firefly genes
DNA.
and they put it into corn. So you have glow-in-the-dark corn, so it keeps certain pests away. And it's feed corn, so our our cattle and our animals eating this feed corn, our chickens are eating the glowworm DNA. Yeah, it's really interesting, the difference between selective breeding and then going in and like really changing things around.
Yes, and there's a big difference between recombinant DNA, sort of engineering, and trying to breed. I mean, we've been at this as humans for a very long time. But we want you to be adaptive and to be looking for things that you can build into your business that'll be beneficial and not destructive. So use failure. Here's what I mean by that. And I think you've alluded to this several times. Don't look at failure as failure. Always ask, what did it tell me?
Right.
and be willing to fail, especially if you can sort for projects where you're going to build relationships, resources, access to resources, knowledge, skills, introductions to other teams, where it'll survive the failure, and you'll have all of these advantages that you got out of it. And then you'll using continual experimentation and OODA. That's relating back to adaptability again. We want to spend a couple of minutes. I think we have them. Yes, we do. So we have a few more minutes to talk about evolutionary psychology and advancement. And before the show, when we were in the kitchen, where I poured myself a glass of water and got my glasses, but didn't bring either of them with me. Just want to say, let's kind of keep an eye on Dave. That we were all talking about examples of this. So companies that in this world especially are insulated are likely not to see what's going on around them and are likely to continue to reproduce bad genetic, like they're going to fold proteins that just don't work. So in an ever-changing environment like this, super cooperative companies tend to be the most successful. Now, this doesn't mean, again, that you don't have, because I have people, I can hear them now, I have trade secrets. I have things, I have processes, somebody's going to steal my best idea. Okay, so being super cooperative does not mean you cannot have trade secrets. It just means that you should be looking for people who maybe can really benefit from a process that you're able to provide to them and still keep it proprietary, but really find a synergy. It means working with teams outside of your own and sharing information and data about who's buying from them, who's buying from you, finding places where you overlap. And so this happens in nature with those trees. That's why I was so fascinated by that example. I just heard this on NPR. There's a scientist doing a lot of work on this right now, and I think we'll have more on it for you. But cooperative environments, in cooperative environments where there's that kind of sharing of information, or in that case, food, with the next generation that's going to survive, that could create very, very powerful synergies of business. So that means that one of the ways to do that is to develop cooperation with the best cooperators. So finding other people that have a long history where they could be trusted to cooperate and create synergy with you. And then I never heard this quite articulated this way, and I hadn't noticed it before. So when I went back and read Koch's book to prepare for today, I saw things I had never seen before. That's the when the student is ready, the master will appear. The second time you're reading a book, I'm reading this book 3 years later, I'm coming to it with a very different mindset and a very different set of experiences, so I'm seeing new and different things. So he suggests that when companies do this sort of thing, they take turns in extracting advantage from the marketplace. Now, the word extraction will set up alarm bells for some people that think that means taking advantage of the marketplace. Koch is always focused on, as I am, on constantly creating more and more value. So whenever I want to raise prices, one of the things that we constantly brainstorm is, how could we create more value so that people would want to pay us more so our margins are higher, and they would not only willingly do it, they'd be happier in the end. So you want to be looking for that, but sometimes in any particular deal, one company is going to benefit more from the other when they're involved in a cooperative venture. That's okay. It's just, if you take a little bit longer horizon, a little bit longer look, you're going to say, okay, there'll be some projects we'll work on where you'll get a 2 times return, and I'm just going to get a 1-time return on my investment. And there's others where I'm going to get a 10-time return, and you're going to get a 2-time return. We just have to be prepared for that, and we can't be working in a way where we're selfishly trying to maximize the amount we get out of the market each time that we do this. And so this requires us to develop practices and habits of cooperation. One of the best ways to do that is within our organization, avoiding those kind of siloed departments that you're talking about, and getting a great sharing of information. If you'd like a really good resource on this, I do not have the affiliate link, but we'll put it up. Is Stanley McChrystal wrote a book, Team of Teams, I think it's called. And this is all about when he came to command JSOC, which is Joint Special Forces Command. Information was siloed. All these intelligence agencies were running separate operations and not sharing information, even as special forces operators were being deployed to carry out missions based on some policy that they come up with, intelligence they had. So he formed these sort of Uber sharing calls where all of them had to share that information.
Right.
And that allowed them to operate in a network that was as agile as the network of terrorists that they were fighting against.
Yeah.
So it's a military example, but good for civilians or military alike to look at it. Did we talk about unintended consequences? This is our last one, I think.
We did not.
We didn't. And this is an interesting one. People who are aligning with these laws of nature should also align with the law of nature that there shall be unintended consequences,
right.
which at first can look like failures, but in the simplest sense they're not, because we get lots of data from them. But they also often reveal things to us about the marketplace or what people are looking for or want that we would never have guessed. This also relates kind of to the willingness to accept the judgment of the marketplace. Also, unintended consequences, to deal with them effectively, require us to root out complexity and to cultivate agility, because we won't even know or be aware of the fact that they're going on if we're not sort of monitoring what's happening. And we've talked about this in UDA and other topics, where it's going to be the nature of the beast that when we build systems and we create more products, that we're going to generate complexity, and then we reach a point where we have to simplify. We've got to radically go in and simplify. And so if we scatter a bunch of products around a core offering, and maybe there were 7, and some of them were just simple things like a checklist. Who signed up for a checklist that also bought this product that could lead them to another product? So it didn't take us a ton of time or money or energy to create that checklist, or maybe it's some content that we're writing about. But people buy something else. We now know what else they want to buy. So maybe we have 5 or 10 things, and there are a couple of pathways to 1 or 2 of those things where people are really buying. Then we can get rid of the stuff they're not buying and that aren't helpful to them. But we can only do that if we create a system where we're constantly trying to root out complexity, because complexity always arises as we're trying to get better. And then learn to identify, evaluate, eliminate, or adapt unintended consequences. So can either of you think of an unintended consequence that happened in one of your businesses? While you're thinking about that, I could share one. So the Supreme Court recently changed the rules for IRAs. So it used to be that if we gave our IRAs to our kids when we died, we thought they inherited both the IRA and the creditor protection, so that if they got divorced or sued in a car accident or something, they were protected. The Supreme Court changed that. So one of the things that we did was we figured, okay, well, we better create special kinds of trusts for these now that will protect them from that risk. And what we found out, one of the unintended but positive consequences of that is that people were so enthralled with the idea of protecting these big IRAs that they had built up that they went back and did it more effectively in their estate planning. So that was good. They bought something that was better for them. It was more complicated. So now we had to learn how to present this thing in a simpler way. So one of the unintended consequences of that was we had to sort of streamline the way in which we presented it, but we got kind of a double bang for the buck. An unintended consequence when we started to work with slightly older people, like we used to do estate planning for people in their 40s, and we fought them all the time. And we got to people in their 50s where they had all kinds of reasons to want to do it, they could do it. An unintended consequence of that was we found out that they were sandwiched between their kids who they were worried about and their parents. So they brought their parents to us for elder law planning, which was, again, a positive unintended consequence. There could be many negative unintended consequences too. Anybody have one?
Yeah, I mean, on the negative side, something we did a couple years ago. So in the martial arts businesses, typically there's some sort of membership commitment. You know, 1 year, 3 years, something like that. So in order to increase our conversions, we gave people the option of freezing, so not necessarily getting out of their membership, but freezing their membership for a short period of time because they might be traveling. So, hey, Sam, I'm going to, Europe on vacation for 3 months, whatever it may be. Can we put our membership on hold? Right?
That sounds
good, and conversions went up. But then what we found over the last couple years of looking at this summer after summer is that when people get that break, it's very hard to get back into the routine. So our conversions went up, but the lifetime value of our accounts went down. So that was a negative unintended consequence. So we're changing that. We're adapting to how we deal with that situation.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So that's a good one. That's a good example.
Yeah, we get it all the time. So a lot of times we'll, in smaller productions, it's always better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission a lot of times.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll go and film in public places, which are allowed legally to do, but it might not be what an event or whoever's there wants you to do. But a lot of the times, I would say 80% of the times that we're out filming and then we go off the beaten path and do something else, someone will see us and then hire us for a job because they like what they're seeing us doing. So it's an unintended consequence of kind of breaking the rules a little bit and going off. We were shooting a documentary and we were shooting at an old-timey rail station out in New Freedom, PA. And the people saw us kind of sneaking up and down the tracks. And they came and said, hey, we want a commercial for our rail system.
Wow.
Nice.
Yeah.
So now, but here's the thing is, you've noticed that.
Yeah.
So now you are conspicuous in doing your naughty business
Right.
because people see it and react.
Yeah.
So you build a system around an unintended consequence
Yeah.
that could have been negative.
Yeah.
And sure, maybe you have to spend a night in jail, but it's every now and then.
Well, we do it.
Who
We
hasn't?
do occasionally get yelled at. One time, my husband was shooting a documentary about Chris Christie in Washington, D.C., and he had all the permissions and everything. Still, Secret Service people came up
Those
and were like, nope.
Pesky Secret
Out.
Service.
So then you miss filming, even though you're hired to do it.
Now, you don't have Secret Service problems at Fashion Week, do you?
No, but you definitely have press issues. If you don't have the right press credentials, or if you... I remember last time he was up at Fashion Week, we were up, and one of our members only had to focus on Madonna because she was there. So even though we're there to shoot fashion, one of the cameras was focused on the fashion, but because somebody was there, we had to shoot Madonna's reactions to the fashion the whole time. So interesting stuff happens all the time.
Yeah.
Well, this was especially interesting for me. I get a lot out of these.
Yeah.
And this one was particularly good. And one of the things that I just want to end with is this kind of reminder that when I went back to prep for this, I read a book I had read thoroughly. Look, well, here.
Yeah.
You can see all of these things that I had marked. Some could describe. There's
Post-it
50,
notes.
right?
Yeah.
But these green ones are all things that I had seen for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
I just hadn't seen them. So before we go, I just want to remind everybody, if you've shared, for which we thank you, we have 2 of these to give away this week. We will ship them out to you. All you've got to do is share and then message Leslie, or you put it in the comments if you don't mind stalkers like coming to your home.
No, I did it from my personal account because the admin issue, so everybody sees me now.
Yeah.
They can friend me and
they know who
say
you
hi.
are.
Yeah.
They control you.
They do.
They can and
They
will.
can find
I'm not
me.
talking about you, Steve. All right. So we thank you for being here. We thank you for your questions and for sharing. And sign up and grab the book. Also, if you're a podcast listener, if you give us I'm assuming it'll be a 5-star rating.
Yeah.
And or better yet, we'll give you double the entries, and we'll pick 1 or 2 next month of podcast listeners that have done this too. So go to the podcast, subscribe if you haven't, and if you want to win one of the 80/20 sales and marketing books, just let us know that you did that. Just let Leslie know, and we'll get you entered to win.
Yeah.
Perfect. This was fantastic. Thank you, everybody. We will see you. Oh, thanks for the liking and loving. And we will see you next week.
Next week.
I don't know if we could tickle the topic. Have we decided what it is?
I know we have a big list now.
We do. We have a list of 40-some, I think.
Yeah.
So your Sundays are messed up for the foreseeable future. So if you know anybody that owns a business or a professional practice, definitely share this to them. And if you own a business or professional practice and want to join Somnath, Alex, and me in Phoenix, Arizona for a 3-day mastermind where we're going to do really intensive stuff, and you're going to come out of there with a plan of action, then just call Lisa at 610-933-8069. And finally, if you've been to one already, you're already part of the family. All you have to do is go to 3 days to success.com